Good morning, Kutztown University. You are listening to Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid on the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR. I am once again distressed and dismayed. Last week was a great week, and the week before that wasn't that bad. I was pumped about not having been interrupted by Jeff the Gamer in air quotes. But, you know, I guess good things come to an end because he reared his head again. He ruined my show again. I was about to talk about Gremlins 2 again, which I was very excited for. I'm always excited to talk about Gremlins 2. And he loves stealing that opportunity from me. But at least he took my request to heart and respected my audience enough to shorten the ridiculously lengthed intro that he had for his stupid segment. So, thanks, I guess. I don't really have any updates on the whole PlayStation 5 thing. For those of you who are unaware of the situation, this so-called Jeff the Gamer is a second personality of mine who likes to take control. He has a mind of his own. Even though he and I guess, share a mind, we're both trapped in this cage together. We are handcuffed, and sometimes he takes control of the vessel that I am in and spends his days playing video games and buying video games and buying very expensive Sony consoles that are out of stock because of supply shortages that people like to resell for twice the market value. And thanks to this Jeff the Gamer, I have fallen victim to one of those resellers. Jeff the Gamer used my body to take $900 out of an ATM in September to buy a PlayStation 5, and I could not be reimbursed by the bank because upon viewing the ATM identification camera that is built into ATMs, they saw me draw $900 out of my bank account. And I guess the excuse of, I don't remember doing it, is not good enough to get $900 back. I'm not going to keep talking about this situation because me talking about this situation inadvertently allows him to continue hijacking my show. And that's not what this show is about. This show is about movies, specifically movies on the Criterion Collection. And for those who are unaware, the Criterion Collection is a film distribution company dedicated to gathering the greatest films from around the world and publishing them in editions of the highest technical quality with supplemental features that enhance the appreciation of the art of film. And all of the Criterions, whenever they are released by spine numbers. There's like a little number on the bottom of the spine that I like to organize numerically in my personal collection. And the way the show is conducted is that I take these Criterion spine numbers and put them into a random number generator, and then select a number at random to talk about a Criterion release at random, which will be like the content of the film as well as the content of the supplemental features. And this works out fairly well because I have seen most of the Criterion Collection. It's just that the problem is I also have really bad luck, and I pretty much only draw numbers of films that I haven't seen. I'm sure the image that I have portrayed myself in gives an average listener the idea that I don't watch a lot of the Criterion Collection, that I don't know what I'm talking about, but I assure you I am very well educated and not really well read. I don't read books. Books are bad. I only really read Criterion essays and subtitles of foreign films. But I guess the term well watched is more appropriate when describing my experience and ability to accurately review a film on the Criterion Collection. I think it is now about time to start kicking off the show, but I'm going to read a passage from the Kutztown notebook beforehand, and once I get the message out of the way, then I will start drawing random numbers. Hello, and welcome back to Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid on the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR, the show where I take Kriterion spine numbers, throw them into a random number generator, and then review a movie at random. That is what I am currently doing, and the first film that we have drawn from the RNG is Spine 698, which is King of the Hill, directed by Steven Soderbergh, and I have not seen that. Spine 1124 is Chan is Missing, directed by Wayne Wang. That's an unfortunate name. This film is actually not out yet on the Criterion Collection. It just got recently announced, which I made a reaction video of on my Instagram account, which you can follow at CinemaCid the Kriterion Kid. Criterion is spelled with a K for alliteration's sake, because K is the first letter in the word kid, and that's also my Gmail email address. So if you would like to write into the show, you can email me as well as slide in my Instagram DMs. But until then, the next spine number is Spine 330, which is Au revoir les enfants, directed by Louis Malle. I haven't seen that, but that is part of his box set, which is Spine 327, 3 films by Louis Malle. There's an E at the end. I don't know how to pronounce that phonetically. The next spine up is Spine 979, which is Swing Time, directed by George Stevens, which is also Spine number 6 on Criterion Laserdisc. I don't know what that movie is. I've never seen it, and I'm sure that Laserdisc is hard to come by because it is indeed a Laserdisc. The next spine number is 836, which is Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, directed by Russ Meyer. He has the same last name as me. I haven't seen that movie, though. So the next spine up is 310, which is Samurai Rebellion, directed by Masaki Kobayashi. I love Masaki Kobayashi. I think Samurai Rebellion stars Tatsuya Nakadai and Toshiro Mifune, and I am correct. It stars both of these phenomenal Japanese actors. I unfortunately have not seen this film, but I guarantee you it is on my watch list. Okay, actually, I'm looking at... What the heck? Okay, so Spine 309 through Spine 313 are all samurai movies. And I love me some samurai movies. I've only seen one of the movies in this succession of samurai movies. So that must have been a good month for fans of samurai flicks whenever those were announced. And decades later, because that was probably a decade ago considering how old those spine numbers were, makes me ecstatic as well. The next spine up is Spine 279, which is Young Torless, directed by Volker Schlondorf. That name is still funny. It hasn't gotten any less funny since I said it the first 2 times in the past. Schlondorf and Torless both have an umlaut above the letter O, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing those things correctly. That doesn't matter, though, because I'm not going to talk about it because I haven't seen it. So the next spine up is Spine 844, One-Eyed Jacks, directed by Marlon Brando. I didn't know he directed a movie, much less a movie that shows up on the Criterion Collection, much less a movie on the Criterion Collection that I haven't seen. So Spine 739 is Safe, directed by Todd Haynes, and Todd Haynes sounds familiar. I don't know why he sounds familiar, though, because I am looking at his filmography, and I haven't seen any of them, including Safe. So I don't know why I recognized him. Spine 489 is Monsoon Wedding, directed by Mira Nair, who is an Indian-American filmmaker based in New York City. That's very cool, but I haven't seen this film. So the next spine up is Spine 709, which is Red River, directed by Howard Hawks, which I haven't seen. I know this is This is incredibly exhausting, me not having seen any of these movies at all. I did mention my bad luck earlier. My string of bad luck is happening right now. So the next spine up is The Confession, which is spine 759. The Confession, directed by Costa Gavras, who is a Greek-French film director, screenwriter, and producer who lives in France. This film appears to be out of print, which is sad, and I haven't seen it. And because it is out of print, that will probably muddy my chances of ever seeing it, unless I can, stream it somewhere. The next spine up is spine 262, which shows up in the Fanny Alexander box set, spine 261, directed by Ingmar Bergman. This is the television version of Fanny and Alexander. I don't know what the difference between the television version and the theatrical version are, but I guess they are different enough to have their own spine numbers. I have not seen it though, so I don't really care. Spine 882 is Marius, directed by Alexander Korda. I have not seen that. Spine 499 is Germany Year Zero, directed by Roberto Rossellini, and I have not seen Germany Year Zero. So, I guess the next film is spine 426, which is The Ice Storm, directed by Ang Lee, which I also have not seen. The spine number after that is 458, which is El Norte, directed by Gregory Nava, and I've not seen that. So, spine 850 is Something Wild, directed by Jack Garfein, or Garfein or something. He has an odd name, and because of his odd name, this movie is probably an odd movie, but I don't know because I haven't seen it, and I am not happy about that. The next spine up is we're lowballing numbers right now. The next spine up is spine 26, The Long Good Friday, directed by John Mackenzie, which is another out-of-print Criterion film, and another Criterion film that I have not seen. So, spine 959 is In the Heat of the Night, directed by Norman Jewison, which I think I drew last week or 2 weeks ago, and I haven't seen it yet. So spine 823 is The In-Laws, directed by Arthur Hiller, and again, I haven't seen it. Spine 90, lowballing again, is Kwai-Don, directed by Masuki Kobayashi. Again, I love Masuki Kobayashi, and Kwai-Don is a great film, so let me talk about it. Kwai-Don is a horror anthology film directed by the great Masuki Kobayashi, who did the Human Condition trilogy and the aforementioned Samurai Rebellion. I think those are the only ones that I really know of, and I haven't seen Samurai Rebellion. I've only really seen the Human Condition trilogy, but I hear that Kobayashi is one of the greats. Because Kwai-Don is a horror anthology, the premise is basically split up into 4 different stories, like your anthologies usually are, and the 4 stories in it are adapted from the stories of an author named Lafcadio Hearn, and his stories were actually inspired by Japanese folklore, and once the stories were acquired, were then expanded upon for its cinematic counterpart. The 4 stories utilize various aspects of filmmaking in effective, albeit different ways to create distinct tones for each one. Not to detract the impeccable sound design and the beautifully composed images, but at the forefront of Kwai-Don's striking visuals are the lights and the set design, and I guess the costumes as well. The reason for this is that they're all reliant on something that Masuki Kobayashi up to this point has never used: color. Just like when I was talking about Dodeska Den, directed by Akira Kurosawa last week, wherein that was his first film with color, and he was very conscious of it, and this consciousness would stem into creativity and surrealism. Kobayashi's first foray into color does the same thing. I have never really considered how similar the films of Kurosawa and the films of Kobayashi are. Actually, just how similar the directors are to begin with. Stylistically, their films in the beginning of their career were very humanistic and realistic, but slowly made their way to surrealism. And that was when color was first introduced into their bodies of work, because when that happened, it became one of the main tools used to create the dreamlike sequences and landscapes that both of the filmmakers depict. And that's not even to mention their casting too. Toshiro Mifune was Akira Kurosawa's right hand, and Kobayashi, having pretty much discovered him, had Tatsuya Nakadai. But, there would still be collaboration every now and then. If I remember correctly, Toshiro Mifune shows up in Samurai Rebellion, and probably a few other Kobayashi picks. And Tatsuya Nakadai shows up in Kurosawa films like High and Low or Harakiri. And like Kurosawa's Dodesu Kaden, Kobayashi's Kwaidan also had a lot of financial trouble. It was, at the time, the most expensive Japanese film ever made, and the production actually ran out of money at one point, and this was towards the end of the filming, which was not good. But as I said, the costumes are phenomenal. Everything was very in-depth, very detailed. The set design had these massive painted backdrops, and the sets themselves were massive. The production actually had to be moved out of a film studio and into an empty airplane hangar because that was the only building that could house such a large production. The music perfectly captures the tone of the film because a lot of the time it's not even really music, and mostly the musical aspects, rather than being something cinematic or orchestral, just kind of stem from old-time traditional Japanese music. Whenever it is not trying to be musical, the composer Toru Takemitsu records just these sound bites that are not made from your conventional instruments, but just random things that would be used for, say, Foley recording. And he also uses the silences in the soundtrack to his advantage as well. He doesn't want the terror being conveyed from the music to be obvious. He wants it to be very low-key. He doesn't want it to draw attention to itself. He was very conscious of the timing at which something would make a sound and how long it would make that sound for, and how long the silences in between those sounds would be. And it's really difficult to differentiate what is part of the score of the film or is just your run-of-the-mill audio design. And I think this difficult differentiation is somewhat unique, and along with the visuals of the film, perfectly conveys the sense of dread and terror that the film succeeds in accomplishing. Masaki Kobayashi's Kwaidan is pretty good. Watch Kwaidan, directed by Masaki Kobayashi, starring Tatsuya Nakadai. It is time to go to a break now. After I am back, I am going to be talking about a film for Black History Month, because this month is currently Black History Month. So stay tuned for my review. Welcome back to Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid on the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR, the show where I take Criterion spine numbers and put them into a random number generator and then select movies to review at random, which is the segment of the show that I am not currently doing, because what I am currently doing is reviewing a film for Black History Month, which was a pre-selected film, which means I am more prepared to talk about it than your average movie talked about on this show. Originally this week, I was going to talk about Charles Burnett's To Sleep with Anger, but last week I was so intrigued by Melvin Van Peebles' film Sweet Sweetback's Bad Heine Song that I decided I really wanted to delve more into his filmography. So this week I chose his 1970 film Watermelon Man from 1970. The trailer of the film alone is what made me want to see the movie, because it perfectly lays out the premise of the film, leaving the audience to wonder where the film is going to go. And I am of the belief that the premise is an original one, a kind of off-kilter and politically conscious fish-out-of-water story. The premise of the film is that a racist, bigoted white man, a businessman who is very financially well off, wakes up one day and finds out that he is now a black man, and this just happens out of nowhere. His family, the town he lives in, and the job he works at are all very racially intolerant, and this man who has embedded himself into this white community with whom he shares the beliefs of now has to live through the black experience, being a victim of bigotry and intolerance. Over the course of the film, he tries to find ways to turn himself back into a white man, but as the film progresses, he then comes to terms with actually being a black man and then accepting it. On the surface level, Watermelon Man is a comedy, but Melvin Van Peebles expertly blends this comedic tone that is conventional for a Hollywood film, because Watermelon Man is, by the way, a Hollywood film. I'll talk more about the production of it later. But he also balances it out with these very serious tones that could be misconstrued as comedy and really make the audience wonder whether or not they should laugh at what is being depicted. Like Sweet Sweetback's Bad Heine Song, the Melvin Van Peebles film I've discussed last week, this is another one of his films where the anger of being outside of somebody's realm of control, i.e. skin color, shows itself. There is a ton of hateful language in this film, which I think the script intends to be a comedy as it is written by a white man, which makes the plethora of original racial slurs that more disgusting, and Melvin Van Peebles being a black director, while depicting it in a comedic fashion to appease the Hollywood overlords, simultaneously gives this biting sense of realism. What is being depicted isn't a fiction, but that the things said and done in this film are truly harmful. Just to name a few off the top of my head, out of all of the countless instances of this in the film, the insurance company that the man works for, the man's name is Jeff, by the way, so the insurance company that Jeff works for is pressured into keeping Jeff around after he turns black just to have a black employee, to give the facade that they are inclusive. Another example is when a white woman wants to have eater with Jeff after he turns black, not for his personality or anything, but just because of the experience of eater with a black man. And another instance is when Jeff is bought out by his neighbors out of his home, so that the presence of a black man in a white neighborhood doesn't devalue their homes and their neighborhood's reputation. Watermelon Man gives the audience this demoralizing narrative, written by a white man to be played off for laughs. Melvin Van Peebles then tricks the audience into thinking that this is going to be a comedy through his aesthetic presentation of it, making everything very bright and very colorful like a 1970s sitcom, while also simultaneously adding his own passionate and angry flourishes. Like when at around 3/4 into the film, everything comes to a screeching halt, and these title cards come up saying, to paraphrase, that black people should be proud to be black because that doesn't make them any less of a person, and that you shouldn't let bigotry stop you from accepting who you are. These are obvious messages to the black audience members viewing Watermelon Man, but I view these as also unconscious messages to Jeff from himself to accept who he is now. And he takes these words to heart, as by the end of the film, he is not only proud to be a black man, but he has also made a success in being a black man, now being a black insurance agent for black clients. This is a segue into the behind-the-scenes production aspects of this film. This ending of black empowerment in the film was actually not in the original script. The original script, again written by a white man, ended with Jeff waking up and it being revealed that his turning into a black man was a bad dream. Melvin Van Peebles obviously did not like this message. This was a very antithetical message to what he wanted to do and what should have been done and was done. But to appease Columbia Pictures, he promised that he would shoot this alternate scene. However, he was only given about 20 or so days to shoot the film, whereas your average white filmmaker around the area of this production, being the late 60s and early 70s, usually were given 3 months as a reasonable amount of time to finish a film. So Melvin Van Peebles shoots his ending first, the one that we see in the film, and then tears down his set and pretty much sends everybody home. And then he tells Columbia Pictures that if they really want this ending that is in the original script, that they would have to fund the rebuilding of everything. and give the production more time to film it. Columbia was not a fan of this idea, and they did not, and therefore Melvin Van Peebles won this fight, and that is incredible. Another thing to mention when it comes to the behind the scenes of Watermelon Man is that when casting during pre-production, Columbia wanted to hire a white man to play Jeff because, he starts out as a white man and then he is a black man for the remainder of the film. However, Jeff is pretty much only white in the first 15 or 20 so minutes in the film. So the rest of the film would be a white man doing blackface, which is disgusting to even think about. In the end, a man named Godfrey Cambridge was casted as Jeff, and on the contrary of a white man doing blackface, Godfrey Cambridge actually does whiteface, which is pretty uncanny and unsettling to look at. This whole situation is very questionable to talk about. The whole film and the events depicted and whether or not it is a comedy or intended to be a comedy is just questionable. But I think that just hammers home how utterly ridiculous and backwards the mere idea of depicting a white man in blackface, not only for Watermelon Man, but just in general, was. And Columbia's justification for wanting a white man to do blackface the whole film was that they wanted the film to be a feel-good comedy. So I guess the white audience can relate to the main character, which is... there's not even a word to describe how insulting that is. Similar to the event in the film where Jeff's boss wanted to keep Jeff around after he had turned black, just to give the company a facade that they are racially inclusive. Columbia gave Melvin Van Peebles the job to direct this script because they wanted to show how inclusive they were while simultaneously putting all of these pointless limitations on Melvin Van Peebles solely because of his skin color. However, Melvin Van Peebles, time and time again, has proven that he can exceed any expectations. Watermelon Man is a Hollywood studio film portraying the black experience in a time where it was extremely lacking, with, again, the same angry passion and creativity of Sweet Sweetback's Bad Heiny song. And Watermelon Man was so successful that it got Melvin Van Peebles a 3-picture deal with Columbia. However, because of how out there Sweetback was, Columbia canceled this 3-picture deal. And that's okay, because that didn't stop Melvin Van Peebles from doing what he needed to do in the film industry. Watermelon Man from 1970, directed by Melvin Van Peebles. Pretty good. Watch Watermelon Man from 1970, directed by Melvin Van Peebles. I think I actually like this film more than Sweet Sweetback's Bad Heiny song. So if you're looking for a Van Peebles film to watch, or you're looking for 2 Van Peebles films to watch this one first. But make sure you do watch the other one as well, because that one's also pretty good, like I said last week. Now comes the next pre-planned film of the show. I have made an announcement of this last week on Twitter. Not on Twitter, sorry. Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid does not have a Twitter. But if he did, his Twitter handle would be Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid, with the ampersand in the front and Criterion being spelled with a K because K is the first letter in the word kid. However, that is my Instagram handle, which is where I actually made the announcement of the film that I am about to talk about, which is the film that I selected for the 2022 Criterion Challenge. And the 2022 Criterion Challenge is a challenge on Letterboxd made by user Ben, wherein every week Ben, I, and the rest of the people partaking in this challenge would select a film from the Criterion Collection or the Criterion Channel, which I personally stuck with Criterion Collection stuff, so I have more things to buy in the future. And each week of this challenge would be a different topic. Right now we are basically getting through the decades. Week 2 was a film from the 20s, 3 from the 30s, and so on. Because this is week 8, it is going to be a film from the 1980s. And the film that I selected to talk about was Francis Ford Coppola's Rumblefish. Rumblefish is a teen angst drama directed by The Godfather's director Francis Ford Coppola. And this isn't the only teen angst drama he's done, the other being The Outsiders, both of which are written by the same novelist, S.E. Hinton. And these films are both somewhat companion pieces being shot pretty much back to back, but they are incredibly antithetical to each other. Not in content, but the way that the content is presented. I'll get into more of that later, but to begin talking with the content of the film, it is about an edgy teenager played by an 18-year-old Matt Dillon who is part of a dysfunctional family. His mother is not around anymore. She is in California, whereas the film takes place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The father is an alcoholic who is barely in the film at all, played by the wonderful Dennis Hopper. And his brother is basically the talk of the town, the very well-known and rebellious Motorcycle Boy, played by a young Mickey Rourke. Motorcycle Boy is not in the beginning of the film. It seems to be that he is a legend of Tulsa, and he is romanticized by all of Rusty James's peers, and Rusty James now has to live up to Motorcycle Boy's reputation. One day, though, Motorcycle Boy comes back, completely unannounced, which is big news considering his reputation in Tulsa. It's not revealed why he comes back, it's actually not revealed why he left, it's just that he is now back into Rusty James's life, and Rusty James really just wants to make Motorcycle Boy proud. One thing to mention is that because of Motorcycle Boy's reputation, a police officer has his radar set on Motorcycle Boy, and always has. There's not much to the plot of the film. Once Motorcycle Boy comes back, he and Rusty James just kind of catch up and do brotherly things, while the predictable events of an angsty delinquent teenager unfold. He has his relationship issues with his girlfriend because he keeps cheating and lying to her about it. He gets kicked out of school because of all the fights that he gets himself into. He has falling outs with his friends who are also his gang members, and you get it. Earlier, I had said that The Outsiders and Rumblefish, despite the similarities in content and characters and setting, and I meant that as in an aesthetic presentation. The Outsiders is much more like realistic and humanistic and very conventional, whereas Rumblefish is a lot more intrusive and challenging, and it has elements of surrealism and abstraction. It also has this really neat noir aesthetic, which The Outsiders, to my recollection, also does, but Rumblefish stands out even more, considering that it is also in black and white. You have this moody lighting to create very long shadows, inner city environments are obscured by fog and rainwater, and the aesthetic is definitely deliberate, because with the aid of the fact that the film was in black and white, some of the walls in the environment were actually painted black to make the shadows look even darker, to make the film even moodier, which I guess is possibly reflective of teenage angst. Apparently, the visual style of Rumblefish was heavily inspired by the German expressionist films of the 1920s. I don't know if I really see it. For the less educated audience members who are not as equipped with the knowledge and the language of film, the director Tim Burton is also very inspired by German Expressionism when it comes to his set design, how everything is very fantastical and warped, and how thoughtful camera placement portrays skewed perspectives of the sets, while also having a very gothic quality to it. And these warped and gothic-like set designs in Rumblefish are not there. I'm not sure where the idea comes from that this film is inspired by German Expressionism, other than Coppola's own statement of the matter, but visually, this does not look like a German Expressionist homage. On the topic of the set design of Rumblefish, though, as I've stated, it takes place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a very run-down city, and there was not a lot of actual set dressing that needed to be done because it was shot on location, and Tulsa, Oklahoma still looked like garbage from the heaps of destruction and disrepair that resulted from the race massacre in 1921. Why don't you go look that up? Anyway, like I said, Rumblefish is in black and white, but there are two parts, or I guess three parts, that have color. Two of them are pretty much identical to each other whenever they show the titular Rumblefish in their blue and red fashion. And then towards the end of the film, whenever the spoiler alert happens, and Rusty James shatters the glass of a police car. So My personal interpretation is that color might be used to express the passion of the characters, or maybe a sense of justice that the characters want to achieve. I won't delve too deep into it, considering the spoilies that will stem from that conversation, but when the film does depict color, it does catch the eye. Another thing that catches the eye are the various stylized depictions of clocks, which might be the closest thing to the aforementioned German expressionist homage, because the way that Francis Ford Coppola sometimes shoots a clock in this film, it is from a perspective that makes the clocks look very warped and give it a Dali-esque quality. And the reason that Francis Ford Coppola stylized these clocks, as well as littering the film with the time lapses of rapidly moving skies, is to reflect the passing of time, which Francis Ford Coppola was very interested in capturing. And being that this is pretty much a coming-of-age film, I can see exactly where he is coming from. Rumblefish from 1983, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. That was pretty good. Watch Rumblefish from 1983, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring Matt Dillon, Mickey Rourke, and Nicolas Cage, and Dennis Hopper, and Diane Lane, who is also in The Outsiders, as well as like a bunch of like DC stuff, and in another film directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring Robin Williams, entitled Jack, from 1996. We'll be right back. Thank you for listening to Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid on the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR. Due to some time restraints in my own personal schedule, I have decided to cut the films that I wish were on the Criterion Collection segment for the next couple of weeks, which is fine because it seems that this Jeff the Gamer person only interrupts during that segment anyway, so honestly, I will take this as a bittersweet scenario. I view this as a way of combating him and suppressing his urges, and that's a good thing. I see it as a good thing anyway. Follow at CinemaCid the Kriterion Kid on Instagram for announcements and reactions to the monthly releases, as well as just other supplemental stuff here and there. And email cinemacidthecriterionkid@gmail.com if you would like to write into the show. However, if you prefer not to email me, but you do prefer Instagram, you can also slide a DM my way as well. Keep in mind that whenever you are contacting these accounts, that Criterion is spelled with a K for alliteration's sake, because K is the first letter in the word kid. Tune in next week, Tuesday at 8 a.m., for the next installment of Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid. I apologize that this one is cut short, but I'm sure it will be made up to you at some point in the near future. Have a good one, Kutztown University. Cinema Cid the Kriterion Kid, signing out.